Dyslexia Awareness Module, Section 1, What is dyslexia? Section 1 of the Dyslexia Awareness Module focuses on answering the question, what is dyslexia? First, definitions of dyslexia, specific learning disabilities, and developmental language disorders will be presented. Second, characteristics of dyslexia will be presented. Third, myths, misconceptions, facts, and prevalence of dyslexia will be addressed. Fourth, comorbidity or the co-occurrence of dyslexia with other conditions will be addressed. Finally, environmental and student background factors of dyslexia will be presented. There will be opportunities throughout the module that will help you review what you have learned. Learning objectives of Section 1 are in participants understanding the definition of dyslexia, specific learning disabilities, and developmental language disorders. Participants will gain awareness of the characteristics of dyslexia. Participants will learn about myths, misconceptions, facts, and prevalence of dyslexia. Participants will learn about comorbidity or the co-occurrence of dyslexia with other conditions. Finally, participants will gain awareness of environmental factors and student background factors that influence reading development and dyslexia. Part 1, Definitions of Dyslexia, Specific Learning Disabilities, SLD, and Developmental Language Disorders, DLD. How do we define dyslexia in the District of Columbia? First, it is important to understand that, according to the regulations governing special education programs for students with disabilities in D.C., dyslexia is not recognized as its own disability category, but a condition recognized under the disability category of specific learning disability, SLD. A link to the regulations governing special education programs for students with disabilities in D.C. is listed on the resource page at the end of this module. Dyslexia means a specific learning disability that a. is neurobiological in origin, b. is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities, which typically result from a deficiency in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. And c. may have secondary consequences, such as problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is a federal law that provides free appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. IDEA governs how states and public agencies provide early intervention, special education, and related services to over 7.5 million eligible infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities, as of school year 2018 to 2019. IDEA and the D.C. regulations share a common definition of a specific learning disability, or SLD. A specific learning disability is a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes, or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations. The SLD category includes dyslexia, among other conditions that affect a student's learning. We will be focusing on dyslexia throughout this module. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability in reading. Dyslexia refers to a pattern of learning difficulties in accurate or fluent word recognition, decoding, and related spelling challenges. Dyslexia researchers have identified 3 types of developmental reading disabilities that often overlap and that may be separate and distinct. They are 1. Phonological processing, which includes quickly and accurately hearing, remembering, recalling, and or producing different speech sounds. 2. Fluency/naming speed, which is also called rapid automatized naming, or RAN. RAN is the ability to quickly name aloud a series of familiar items, like objects, pictures, colors, or symbols. And 3. Language comprehension, which includes understanding both spoken and written language. Individuals with dyslexia may experience some or all these types of reading-related challenges. It is also important to note that dyslexia and developmental language disorders, DLD, are interrelated through language processes. Both dyslexia and DLD are neurobiological in origin. Dyslexia is connected to the phonological component of language. Early intervention for students with, or at risk for, dyslexia, DLD, and SLD can prevent lifelong academic difficulties. This diagram shows how developmental language disorders such as dysorthography, a specific disorder of spelling, dyspraxia, a disorder of movement that impacts speech, and dysgraphia, a specific disorder that affects writing abilities and can manifest itself as difficulty with spelling, handwriting, and putting thoughts on paper, may co-occur with dyslexia, which is connected to the phonological component of language. This diagram also shows how students with dyslexia may have both DLD and SLD. To recap, dyslexia, developmental language disorder, DLD, and specific learning disabilities, SLD, are interrelated through language-related components of oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, word recognition/decoding, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. Dyslexia, DLD, and SLDs are all neurobiological in origin. Dyslexia is connected to the phonological component of language. Early intervention for students with, or at risk for, dyslexia, DLD, and SLD can prevent lifelong academic difficulties. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, IDEA, includes dyslexia within the definition of SLD, which is a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. In this activity, learn from dyslexia expert Guinevere Eden about what parts of the brain are used for reading. See how the brain changes when people with dyslexia learn to read fluently. Please pause the video and complete activity 1-1. Let's review what we've learned about the definition of dyslexia. Please pause the video and complete assessment 1-1. Part 2, Characteristics of Dyslexia. The characteristics of dyslexia include sound-symbol correspondence, difficulty with mapping phoneme/letter sounds to letter names, decoding, difficulty with accurately reading, or sounding out, unknown words, and fluency, slow, inaccurate, or labored oral reading, a slow reading rate. Characteristics of dyslexia may also include spelling, difficulty with learning to spell, or with spelling words, even common words, accurately. Language comprehension, difficulty understanding and or retaining spoken language, and reading comprehension, weak decoding and limited fluency can interfere with reading comprehension, even if oral language comprehension skills are adequate. The main sources for these characteristics include weaknesses in phonological awareness, including segmenting, or breaking apart, blending, or putting together, and manipulating, or changing, the spoken syllables and sounds in words. Another characteristic of dyslexia is in weakness in phonics skills, starting with learning the names of letters and their associated sounds. Once the letters and their sounds have been learned, the reader must apply this knowledge to printed words. This process requires orthographic mapping, which refers to matching the speech sounds, the phonemes, to the appropriate letters or letter patterns, graphemes. Another characteristic of dyslexia may be phonological memory or working memory, which is difficulty holding information about sounds and words in memory, in order to use this information to read or spell. Another characteristic of dyslexia is in rapid naming of familiar objects, colors, numbers, or letters of the alphabet. Let's recap the characteristics of dyslexia. Students with dyslexia may experience challenges with sound-symbol correspondence, or mapping phoneme/letter sounds to letter names, decoding, or accurately reading, or sounding out, unknown words, fluency, or rate and accuracy of oral reading, spelling, and language comprehension, or understanding and or retaining spoken language. Characteristics of dyslexia may also include reading comprehension weaknesses, since decoding and limited fluency can interfere with understanding, even if oral language comprehension skills are adequate. Phonological weaknesses, including segmenting, or breaking apart, blending, or putting together, and manipulating, or changing, the spoken syllables and sounds in words, and phonics weaknesses, starting with learning the names of letters and their associated sounds. Once the letters and their sounds have been learned, the reader must apply this knowledge to printed words. This process requires orthographic mapping, which refers to matching the speech sounds, the phonemes, to the appropriate letters or letter patterns, graphemes. Dyslexia characteristics include challenges with phonological memory or working memory, or holding information about sounds and words in memory in order to use this information to read or spell, and rapid naming of familiar objects, colors, numbers, or letters of the alphabet. Let's review what we've learned about the characteristics of dyslexia. Please pause the video and complete assessment 1-2. Part 3, Myths, Misconceptions, Facts, and Prevalence of Dyslexia. Here are the most common and harmful dyslexia myths. Is dyslexia caused by backwards reading? No. Reversing letters is not a characteristic associated with dyslexia. There is no evidence that students with dyslexia see or read letters or words backward. Dyslexia is not caused by a problem with vision. It is linked to a phonological processing deficit. Do vision problems cause dyslexia? No. Vision is fundamental for sighted reading, but there is no evidence suggesting visual problems cause dyslexia. Is dyslexia caused by social-emotional challenges? No. When the environment, school, home, fails to provide enough support for students, the social, emotional and behavioral challenges that often come along with learning and attention issues can lead to serious consequences. These include social isolation, disproportionate disciplinary rates and an increased likelihood of skipping school, dropping out and becoming involved with the criminal justice system. Can dyslexia be outgrown? No. Students with dyslexia do not outgrow this learning disability. The challenges of dyslexia do not disappear or resolve on their own, but with intensive supports and help, students can employ strategies to support their specific learning disabilities. This harmful myth that students can outgrow their learning disabilities may cause students to underperform and experience self-esteem issues that exacerbate their learning problems. In this activity, extend your learning about dyslexia myths and facts by reflecting on a personal story. Please pause the video and complete activity 1-2. Facts about dyslexia. Dyslexia is neurobiological in origin. Dyslexia is hereditary, it runs in families. The image on this slide shows the areas of the brain that are involved in dyslexia: the primary auditory cortex, the primary visual cortex, and the cerebellum. Across the world's languages, dyslexia is related to the phonological processing of language, how sounds map to the letters of the alphabet. The diagram on this slide shows the areas of the brain that process sounds and words in any language. Individuals with dyslexia can learn to read and write through explicit and evidence-based interventions. This image shows how each of the areas of reading instruction and intervention can support students with dyslexia and reading difficulties. Students with dyslexia may experience challenges with reading comprehension, reading fluency, phonics, phonemic awareness, and vocabulary and memory for words and language. How widespread is dyslexia? Within school populations, about 13 to 14% nationwide are identified as having a special education condition such as dyslexia. Half of all students who are identified for special education have a specific learning disability. About 85% of those students have a specific learning disability in reading and language processing. Up to 15 to 20% of the population have symptoms of dyslexia, including slow or inaccurate reading, weak spelling, and writing, and would benefit from systematic and explicit structured literacy instruction to support reading, writing, and language skills. Estimates vary across regions, states, and around the globe. Language-based SLDs such as dyslexia are the most prevalent type of SLD. The figure on this slide highlights prevalence in Washington, D.C. 1/3 of students with identified disabilities in D.C. have specific learning disabilities, or SLD. Language-based SLDs such as dyslexia are the most prevalent type of SLD. Let's review what we've learned about dyslexia myths, facts, and prevalence. Please pause the video and complete assessment 1-3. Part 4, Comorbidity of dyslexia with other conditions. Dyslexia may be comorbid with other conditions. Comorbidity is when the symptoms of one condition like dyslexia co-occur or are shared with another condition. Dyslexia, SLD, and ADHD co-occur at rates up to 45% and their symptoms are shared. Students with dyslexia may have co-occurring conditions such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression, anxiety, or another SLD, such as dyscalculia, or mathematics disability. Dyslexia, SLD, and ADHD co-occur at rates up to 45% and their symptoms are shared. Students with dyslexia may have co-occurring conditions such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression, anxiety, or another SLD, such as dyscalculia, or mathematics disability. Let's review what we've learned about the comorbidity of dyslexia with other conditions. Please pause the video and complete assessment 1-4. Part 5, Environment and Student Background Factors Influencing Dyslexia. Environmental factors may influence how dyslexia develops in students. These include time, the timing of when students are identified with reading and learning difficulties; resources, whether families have access to supports and services to address their students' dyslexia; and opportunities, whether school professionals have access to resources and supports for dyslexia. Family background and heredity is another factor of dyslexia. Here is a look at some families with children in their families who have dyslexia and different language background factors such as bilingualism. You can see in each of the family trees how dyslexia may or may not be present across different children and families. In the Garcia family, Wilma, an emergent bilingual learner, was identified with dyslexia in 4th grade. Her sister Lupe is in 2nd grade and is currently in the dyslexia identification process. Lupe's twin brother Omar is also an emergent bilingual 2nd grader who is a typically developing reader. In the Johnson family, 1st grade Mila was identified with dyslexia in kindergarten. Her brother Adrian is in 4th grade and is a typically developing reader. Their older sister Elise is in 9th grade and was identified with dyslexia in 1st grade. These two family trees point out that dyslexia is hereditary, but that doesn't mean that all children will have it, and that this is true regardless of language background factors. A student's language and cultural background should be considered in relation to their reading difficulties. For example, if a student is learning sound and symbol systems across 2 or more languages, including dialects, they may show differences from their general English-only speaking peers in their rate of reading progress. This should not be confused with a reading disability or dyslexia. Literacy instruction needs to be explicit across all language systems for students to apply their funds of knowledge and make connections across language systems, as well as to learn specific English reading skills. It is important to consider a student's language and cultural background as related to their reading by asking: is a learner's reading difficulty associated with English learning variations, as a second language, multiple dialects or language variations? These variations include biliteracy, bilingualism, and multi-dialect learning. Next, we will review 3 evidence-based strategies for supporting students who have English language and learning variations: forming collaborative teams, using multiple measures, and being culturally and linguistically responsive. The first evidence-based dyslexia identification strategy for supporting students who have English language and learning variations is in forming collaborative teams. Team members should include parents and family members, the student, when appropriate, bilingual educators, cultural liaisons, general education teachers, special education teachers, school administrators, and related service providers such as the school psychologist, speech-language pathologist, and interpreters. The second evidence-based dyslexia identification strategy for supporting students who have English language and learning variations is in using multiple measures. Measures include a student's health and attendance, interviews and surveys with a student's parent/family, student observations in classroom and home settings, student work samples, standardized test results, local assessments, teacher interviews, student performance data, oral language samples, and history of interventions that have been provided to the student. The third evidence-based identification strategy for supporting students who have English language and learning variations is in being culturally and linguistically responsive. This includes integrating students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds, building and nurturing positive relationships with students, parents and families, and selecting assessments that produce valid results for English learners. Let's recap environmental and student background factors related to dyslexia. Time, when a student's reading difficulties are identified. Resources and opportunities, supports, services, and professional development that may or may not be available to families and school professionals. Heredity, siblings may have dyslexia, parents may have dyslexia, extended family may have dyslexia, and student language background, biliteracy, bilingualism, multi-dialect learning, and cultural and language variations should be honored and recognized. Let's review what we've learned about background factors of dyslexia. Please pause the video and complete assessment 1-5.